The Soldier's Story, Vietnam in Their Own Words, by Ron Steinman. Read by Edward Holland. I think anyone that's ever been in battle is a little bit scared. If he wasn't, he isn't up there where the battle was, to me. You're not really scared, but you know it's either you or him. Heroes are funny people. A dead man is not a hero. A hero is the man who makes the other son of a bitch die for his country. Basil Plumley, Sergeant Major, 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, 1st Air Cavalry Division, Air Mobile. Battle of Ya Drang Valley, November, 1965. Introduction. This book is about the Vietnam War as seen and felt by the young men who were there. During their tour of duty, some battled aggressive North Vietnamese regulars in the Ya Drang Valley. Some lived under siege in Khe Sanh. Some joined in fierce combat with the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese in and around Saigon and Hue during the Tet Offensive. They bombed North Vietnam, rescued downed pilots, and sometimes became prisoners of war. They conducted secret operations in Laos and Cambodia. And finally, a small number witnessed the end of the war when Saigon fell in 1975. We conducted extensive interviews for the 6-hour documentary series The Soldier's Story, produced by ABC News for the Learning Channel. Our mandate for the television series was to let these men tell stories of their life in battle. Under siege at Khe Sanh, in ambush at the Battle of the Ya Drang Valley, and during the Tet Offensive, the Air War, the Secret War, and the Fall of Saigon. Of the more than 150 men we talked to on and off camera, 77 are in this book. Unlike a documentary film that allows very little time for an individual to be heard, a book has the luxury of length. Here in these pages, these men can and do express themselves fully. This is their personal story, not a formal or complete history of their lives in Vietnam or the Vietnam War. Combat is never precise. It is confusing, frightening, deadly, an unexpected hell. The book does not discuss strategy and tactics, though right or wrong decisions at the command level in significant moments did seriously affect the lives of every one of these men. Rather than the battle plans conceived by generals in their air-conditioned offices far from the front, what mattered most to the soldier in the field was getting over the next hill, plowing safely through the next rice paddy, getting through the day. The so-called big picture was of little consequence to the average GI. After only a few short weeks in South Vietnam, these ordinary soldiers learned that in war there are no winners or losers. Fatalism quickly emerged as the centerpiece of their existence. Mainly, these men experienced the discomfort of life in a strange land from the first hour they landed in South Vietnam until the day they departed. One Marine says he and his buddies lived only for Semper Fi, always faithful to the basic precept of one for all for one. Every man in the book echoes that thought. Soldiers helped each other because they knew they would get help in return. It was not crass or calculating. It was genuine, real, meaningful. They learned to trust each other as their only salvation. Along with that sense of duty, a responsibility to and for each other, however, they often had a feeling of helplessness, particularly when under fire. We should never forget that these were men in war. Their experience of battle was direct, mostly raw, filled with emotion. They had a sense of the waste of life and of time. Clearly, they left feeling a terrible sadness about Vietnam and the war's horrors. Their memories of a distant time that no longer exists are not only sad but desolate, recalling an experience that was in many ways often formless. Except on the battlefield, their lives had no pattern, no constant. These young men who'd never been away from home were now thousands of miles away from the drive-in and football field in an atmosphere and environment that said, "This is the Twilight Zone." In South Vietnam, a place of unusual customs, peoples, ideas, language, and religions for American soldiers. Danger was everywhere. The inexplicable was the only constant. Their life was the camps, foxholes, sandbags, bunkers, hooches, tents, jungles, swamps, rice paddies, snakes, rats, and even tigers. For the most part, though, war was mundane and boring, the everyday. But no one ever wanted it to become too familiar. Troops kept their spirits up in spite of the routine of their jobs. Some semblance of normalcy was necessary. Yet the men in this book found it impossible to lead normal lives. In their interviews, they rarely, if ever, talk about being heroes, seeking glory, or acting with courage, though they do describe heroism and courage as a matter of course. Their way of surviving was to rise to extraordinary spiritual and physical heights without thumping their chests. Vietnam may also have been the last American war where individual acts of heroism were still possible. Men in small units going up against an aggressive, battle-savvy enemy was still the norm. After each firefight, the Americans gained a grudging respect for their communist foe. High-tech war did not yet dominate as it would in the Gulf War. I was present for many of these battles, though as a journalist, not a soldier. In 1965, a few months before going to Vietnam to serve as Saigon bureau chief for NBC News, I produced a network feed for NBC News from Dover, Delaware, late one November afternoon. The day was brutally cold. Angry black clouds filled the sky in twisted masses, as if nature were planning revenge for all those unnecessary deaths. NBC had 2 cameras at the Air Force Base to cover dead soldiers returning home from a still little-known war. We saw the Air Force cargo plane appear in the distance, land, and taxi to a stop. Its rear cargo doors opened. Plain wooden boxes rolled out of the cargo bay. Inside the boxes were the remains of young Americans in black polyurethane body bags. Historians like to give war a face. There was no face to war that anyone recognized that day. These were the dead coming home for a proper burial. Though the fighting had stepped up in Vietnam, the war had not yet taken hold in the public mind. It was not the overpowering force it would soon become in 1966. But someone at NBC News had decided body bags arriving from Saigon in plain pine boxes would interest our audience. I do not know how many people watched our feed that day, but I'm sure the simple, dignified ceremony was touching and moving to our viewers. As Pentagon officials saluted the dead, other young men removed the caskets one box at a time. Dignitaries and families were there to claim the returning bodies. Mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers of the dead soldiers cried, often uncontrollably. There were a few short speeches. The event ended, and we journalists went on to other stories. For the moment. Less than 6 months later, I was in Saigon as bureau chief, seeing the war for myself, learning how men survive and succeed in the most adverse situations. For all I know, some of those dead that gloomy day might have been returning from the fierce and unexpected battle in the Ya Drang Valley in early November between American air cavalry and North Vietnamese regulars, an intense fight not immediately understood as a powerful portent of things to come. For many, as with me, arriving at Saigon's Tan Son Nhut airport was a journey into another dimension. The week before I left New York for my first trip to the Far East, there were long and sometimes tearful farewells with friends and family. During the flight there was too much wine and too many cigarettes. Apprehension from lack of sleep, combined with fear of the new, made me feel restless during the long trip. My passage aboard the crowded Pan American jet finally ended when I arrived in a war zone that I would call home for more than 2 years, and would remain part of my life for the next 3 decades. When the cabin doors opened, the blast of heavy heat nearly overwhelmed me. I was unable to absorb all the sights and sounds that instantly invaded my body and soul. I found it impossible to process the new information until hours, days, weeks, perhaps even years later.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?